I still remember the way the lights looked over the dance floor that night, soft and golden over white tablecloths and nervous smiles. The band playing some old pop song everyone knew the words to. I remember my sister Avery standing in the center of it all in her dress, cheeks flushed, laughing with that wide-open laugh that made people around her feel safe. 3 months ago at Willow Creek Estate in Bend, Oregon, I watched her marry a man I truly believed was good. His name was Noah, and at the time, if you had asked me to describe him, I would have said he was polished, respectful, successful, the kind of guy moms hope their daughters will bring home. I let myself relax that night, believing Avery had finally found someone who would carry some of her weight, instead of adding to it. My name is Selena Ward. I am 29 years old, and I work as a paralegal at Rhodes and Keller Law Associates in Portland. I am not anyone special. At least, that is how I used to think of myself. I am the person behind the scenes who reads the fine print, who catches the small mistakes, who colors in the gaps of other people's stories with documents and timelines. When Avery got engaged, she was buried in shifts at the Children's Hospital, double shifts and overnight rotations, and she asked me to help with all the planning details. I was the one who reviewed the contracts, answered emails from vendors, and jumped on calls with Clara, the wedding planner Avery hired after realizing Pinterest boards were not enough to run a real event. That is how Clara and I got close. While Avery rushed from the hospital to dress fittings, I sat at my laptop with spreadsheets and checklists, talking through menus, rain plan, and the 100 little decisions that turn a date on a calendar into a wedding day. I liked Clara. She was in her early 40s, sharp and organized, but with this calm energy that made even last-minute changes feel like were under control. She teased me that I was her dream client because I actually read things. In another life, she said, I was probably meant to run events myself. I always brushed it off. I was happier being the quiet one, with my red pen and my notebook. Before I tell you about the phone call that changed everything, I am curious about you. What are you doing while you listen to this story? Are you folding laundry? Driving home from work? Walking your dog in the neighborhood you have lived in for 20 years? For me, when this all really started, I was sitting at my desk in a gray office that smelled faintly of old coffee and printer ink, thinking about nothing more dramatic than what to cook for dinner. It was a Thursday afternoon in December of 2023, one of those Portland days where the sky seems to press down on the buildings, and the rain does not fall in dramatic drops. It just hangs there in the air like a cold mist you cannot quite wipe off. The office was quiet. Half the staff had already slipped out early to start their holiday travel, leaving a strange hush in the hallways. I had just finished drafting a summary of an estate case, and I was leaning, back in my chair, rubbing my eyes, when my cell phone buzzed across the desk. I glanced at the screen and saw Clara Bennett's name. That alone was surprising. We had exchanged a few messages after the wedding, mostly her checking in to say how beautiful the photos had turned out, sending a link to the online gallery. There was no reason for her to call me months later. I hesitated for a second, that small prickle at the back of my neck, then answered. Her voice did not sound like the Clara I knew from planning calls, the one who kept a smile in her tone, even while telling me the florist had double booked, or the rental company had delivered the wrong chairs. Her words came out tight, each one carefully controlled. She said she was sorry to bother me at work, but she had found something in the wedding photos. She said she needed to show me in person. Tonight, if possible. The part that really sank its claws into me was what she said next. She asked me not to tell Avery yet. She said I needed to see it first. I remember sitting very still after she said those words, my hand gripping the phone so hard my knuckles hurt. Not tell Avery. There are certain phrases that make your stomach tighten, even before your brain catches up. Not telling my sister made my body go cold. My first instinct, the big sister voice in my head, wanted to say that anything about Avery should go to her first. But the part of me that has spent years piecing together stories from paper trails heard something deeper. Clara was afraid of doing this wrong. She trusted that I could help decide what to do. I told her I could come by after work. She gave me the address of her studio in the northwest part of the city, a corner of Portland I had only driven through a few times on my way to someplace else. The call ended, and I sat there staring at the dim reflection of my face in the book. Dark phone screen. Outside my office window, the clouds were already beginning to push the afternoon into early evening. Gray. I suddenly felt like the building had shifted around me, like the floor under my chair had gone just slightly uneven. For a few minutes, I tried to convince myself that this was nothing as serious as it sounded. Maybe there had been some kind of billing issue with the photographer and Clara wanted my help reviewing the contract. Maybe there was a problem with the venue that involved liability. It would make sense to call the paralegal who knew all the paperwork. I am good at building these rational little ladders when I am scared, climbing up them, one thought at a time. But the truth was, Clara had access to plenty of attorneys herself. She worked with contracts every week. She did not need me to look at a minor issue. And she would not stress not tell Avery over something simple. As I shut down my computer, my mind drifted back, uninvited, to a small moment at the reception that I had almost forgotten. Avery and I had been standing near the edge of the dance floor, waiting for the band to switch songs so she and Noah could go out for their first dance as husband and wife. Her bouquet was shaking just slightly in her hands. Nerves and joy twisted together. She leaned into me and asked if I had seen Noah. She said he had just been next to her, and then he was gone. I had laughed it off, telling her that grooms were like loose balloons at parties, always getting pulled from one corner to another by guests wanting a picture, or a drink, or a joke. I had told her he would show up as soon as the band called their names. Now, walking down the hallway past the empty receptionist's desk and out into the wet chill of the parking lot, that memory no longer felt cute. It felt like a loose thread I had not noticed at the time, one that, if I pulled on it, might unravel more than I wanted to see. I pulled my coat tighter around myself and unlocked my car, the sound of the beep oddly loud in the damp air. The drive across town took about 40 minutes, though it felt like two different time frames were playing at once. On one level, I was just another commuter, inching through traffic on the freeway, windshield wipers smearing the drizzle into gray streaks, radio murmuring some talk show I was not really hearing. On another level, my mind was back at Willow Creek. I saw again the string lights in the trees, the way Mom kept dabbing at her eyes with the corner of a cloth napkin, the rare softness on Dad's face as he hugged Avery and told her how proud he was. I had cried too that night, partly from happiness, partly from a tiredness I'd been carrying for years. You work hard for people you love. You help them fill out forms, sign leases, apply for jobs, plan weddings. You tell yourself that if you just do everything right, check every box, read every line, bad things will stay away from them. It is a kind of magical thinking, and as a legal professional, I know better. But as a sister, I still fall for it. So the idea that something had slipped past me, that something had been hiding in the background of Avery's perfect day, made my chest feel tight. By the time I turned off onto the smaller streets that led into the arts district where Clara's studio was located, full dark had settled in. The rain was steadier now, glistening in the headlights of the cars ahead of me and turning the pavement into a sheet of reflected red and white. The buildings out here were a mix of old warehouses and newer glass-fronted spaces with art galleries, yoga studios, and small restaurants glowing with warm light. Clara's studio was in one of the older brick buildings, the kind that had big windows and wide concrete steps leading up from the sidewalk. I found a parking spot half a block away and sat in the car for a moment with the engine off, listening to the tick of the cooling metal and the faint patter of rain on the roof. My hands were resting on the steering wheel, and I realized my fingers were curled in so tight they almost hurt. I thought about calling Dad. He and I have had our rough patches, especially when it comes to me getting too involved in other people's problems, as he likes to phrase it. I could almost hear his voice in my head telling me not to borrow trouble, not to go looking for things that would only hurt. But then I pictured Avery, the way she had looked when she first showed me her ring, the way she had said that, for once. Life felt like it was working out the way it was supposed to. I owed it to her to walk up those steps and find out what Clara had seen. So I took a slow breath, grabbed my bag, and stepped out into the rain. The cold hit my face, sharp enough to jolt me fully into the present. My boots made small, wet sounds on the sidewalk as I walked toward the studio door. Light spilling out from the lobby window onto the slick concrete. Whatever was waiting upstairs, it was already real. The only choice I had left was whether to look at it or keep pretending. Everything was fine. I reached for the handle and pushed the door open. The warm light from the lobby did little to steady my nerves as I walked inside. The studio was quiet except for the soft hum of a heater somewhere in the corner. Clara must have been watching for me because she stepped out from a side room. Almost immediately, her expression tense in a way I had never seen during the entire year of planning Avery's wedding. She greeted me by name, but her eyes moved past me, as if making sure no one else had followed. Without another word, she gestured for me to come upstairs to her editing room. I followed her up a narrow staircase, my hands sliding along the cool metal railing. The building felt different tonight, like the shadows had weight. When we reached the landing, she pushed open the door to her workspace. Usually it was bright and inviting, filled with sample albums and soft music. But now only one desk lamp was on. It cast a small circle of yellow on her computer and the stack of printed photographs beside it. She closed the door quietly after I stepped inside, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. She finally let out a breath and said she had been debating for days whether to call me. Then she reached for the top photo from the stack and handed it to me. I held it gently, expecting something awkward or embarrassing, but nothing that would make my stomach drop before I fully understood what I was seeing. It was a shot from the reception, taken during a moment I did not remember watching in real time. Hallie Grant, one of Avery's bridesmaids and longtime friend from nursing school, stood close to Noah. Much too close. The angle captured the way her body leaned in, her hand brushing the edge of his jacket, her face tilted toward him with an expression I had only seen her direct toward men she was trying to charm. But what froze me was the look on Noah's face. It was not confusing. It was not uncomfortable. It was familiar. I felt the air leave my chest in a slow, heavy exhale. I looked up at Clara and she nodded slightly, as if confirming that I was not imagining what the picture suggested. She said she had gone through hundreds of images while preparing a curated set for her portfolio. And something about this one made her pause. She told me she had looked closer at the raw file and noticed faint signs of manipulation around the edges, slight distortions that suggested someone had attempted to edit the moment before exporting it. I asked her how certain she was, and she said, enough to lose sleep over it. She picked up another photograph and placed it beside the first. In this one, Hallie's back was to the camera, and Noah's hand rested on the small of her back. Not casual, not friendly. Touching someone at that spot is intimate by nature, and it was happening in a hallway that led to the service entrance, not on the dance floor where people might accidentally brush against each other. I felt a cold prickle at the back of my neck. A memory rose from that night, the one that had drifted in earlier but now hit me with sharper edges. Avery standing next to me, bouquet trembling just a little in her hands, whispering that she could not find Noah. She had said he was just beside her, and then suddenly gone. I had told her not to worry, that grooms disappear all the time during receptions, pulled by relatives or photographers. She smiled and nodded. She trusted me. She trusted him. Now, looking at Clara's photos, that moment twisted in my stomach, tightening until I felt slightly dizzy. Clara moved to her computer and pulled up another image. This one more unsettling than the last two. It showed Noah talking to the venue manager. The strange part was that the venue manager scheduled for Avery's wedding was a woman named Erin, someone I had spoken with many times. But the person in this photograph was a man I had never seen before. According to Clara, he was not on the staff schedule for the event. She had checked twice. And what chilled me even more was the object Noah was handing him, a slim white envelope, the kind used for cash payments. The photo captured the man's hand reaching out, palm open. Noah's face was partially turned, but I could still see the tension in his jaw. It was not the smile he wore for the camera when he posed with Avery. It was something else entirely. I asked Clara when this photo was taken. She said the timestamp showed about 15 minutes before the bouquet toss, a time when everyone was inside the ballroom. I tried to remember where I had been at that moment, who I was talking to, whether I had noticed Noah slip away. I could not recall anything unusual. That made it worse. What else had happened that night while we were laughing and dancing and believing that Avery had married a man who adored her? Clara reached for a chair and asked me to sit. She said there was a reason she had called me instead of Avery, and it was not because she wanted to keep secrets. She reminded me that I had been the one coordinating with her for almost everything. The one who knew the contracts and schedules and changes better than Avery did. She said she could not bring this to Avery without knowing exactly what it meant. And she did not want to hurt her if she was wrong. Her eyes were tight with worry when she said she trusted my judgment. That meant more to me than I expected. It also made me feel the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. I looked again at the 3 photos laid out in front of me, trying to make sense of them. Hallie and Noah, closer than they should have been. His hand on her back. The envelope with the unknown man. There was a thread here, but I could not see where it led yet. Part of me wanted to explain it all away, to rationalize that Hallie and Noah had a strange sense of humor, or that the envelope was a tip. But the truth was clearer than any excuse. Something was wrong. Not just the possibility that Noah had betrayed Avery. There was a larger pattern forming, one that gave me the same uneasy feeling I get when a legal case looks straightforward on the surface, but one document sits out of place, like a warning. Clara asked if I remembered anything from that night that felt off. I thought again about Avery asking where he had gone. I thought about how Hallie had seemed unusually bright that evening, almost glowing in a way that made me uncomfortable even at the time. I thought about how Noah had given a short toast, thanking our family for welcoming him, but his eyes had not landed on Mom or Dad. He had looked past them, scanning the crowd the way someone might scan an airport terminal, searching for something. I told Clara all of that, and the more I said aloud, the more the air in the room seemed to get heavier. She hesitated before telling me that there were a few more images she needed to show me, ones she had debated even printing. I braced myself, not knowing what could possibly make this worse. She clicked to the next file on her computer, and as the image filled the screen, I realized that everything I thought I knew about Avery's wedding was about to unravel. The next image on Clara's computer loaded slowly, almost taunting me. Another hallway angle, higher this time. And there he was again, the same man who was not on the schedule. He stood half-hidden behind a column, posture too controlled, too aware, as if timing his entrance into a scene only he understood. Clara clicked forward. The man turned his head toward the ballroom, a streak of blue light from the dance floor cutting across his cheek. One hand hovered near his jacket pocket. Then, one more still frame. He was gone. Same hallway, same angle. The man had vanished between frames like he had never been there at all. Clara touched my chair lightly. She said she did not trust still photos alone, which was why she had called Shannon Pierce, the event coordinator on duty, the night of the wedding. Shannon was the type who seemed everywhere at once, with her clipboard and walkie-talkie, and she had pulled a narrow slice of security footage for Clara after hearing. There might be a real problem. Clara opened a folder labeled only with the wedding date. My body went rigid. She clicked a file. A grainy black and white hallway appeared, people milling in and out, servers carrying trays. She scrubbed through the timeline until the corner timestamp read 8:40, 7 in the evening. Hallie appeared first, dress unmistakable even in low resolution. She walked fast, glancing back once before slipping toward the service corridor. Seconds later, Noah stepped into view from the opposite side. He was not disoriented, not drunk, not lost. He moved with precision and purpose, eyes locked on the hallway where Hallie had gone. Then he disappeared after her. Clara fast-forwarded. 9 minutes. 10. 11. Hallie returned first. Slower, hair a little mussed. She stopped under the camera, took a breath, then smoothed her dress, and headed back into the ballroom. A few beats later, Noah stepped out. He paused under the camera, scanning both directions, shoulders tight, jaws set. He straightened his tie like nothing had happened, then walked toward the music and lights. My stomach knotted so sharply it almost hurt. 11 minutes. Not 1 or 2. Ein. On your wedding night. Clara replayed the moment Noah glanced at the camera. In that frozen frame, he did not look like a man who had been chatting innocently with a bridesmaid. He looked like someone managing a problem. I asked about the man with the envelope. Clara opened a second clip, this one showing the side entrance used by staff. A catering truck backed up. A couple guests stepped outside. Then Noah stepped out of the door from the hallway. The unfamiliar man stood waiting in the shadows. Clara slowed the footage. The man reached into his jacket and handed Noah something small and dark, a flash drive. Noah pocketed it. Then Noah pulled out the white envelope from the still photo and handed it to who? The man. No handshake, no small talk, no normal payment courtesy, just an exchange made to disappear. The man walked off. Noah stayed still, staring at the ground before re-entering the building. A cold ripple ran down my spine. Whatever that was, it was not a groom tipping staff, Clara said when she realized the wrong manager appeared on the pictures. She checked the staffing records. No one by that description had been hired. No badge, no sign-in, no connection to Willow Creek at all. A ghost. My mind jumped to cases I had helped assemble as a paralegal. Fraud, false identity, financial misconduct. I had seen enough patterns to know these moments were rarely isolated. Clara reopened one of the raw images of Noah and Hallie. She zoomed into the faint haloing around them, showing how someone had blurred the edges to hide how close they were standing. A sloppy, rushed, digital cover-up. The untouched originals told a different story. Every sharp line, every detail. I asked how anyone even had access to alter the images. She said there had been a brief window after the wedding when a temporary assistant, recommended by Noah, had access to the workstation and memory cards. At the time, it seemed harmless, a favor to help someone build a portfolio. In hindsight, it felt scripted. The pieces lined up too neatly, someone who should not be there. Altered photos, a flash drive, a cash envelope, 11 minutes missing. A groom whose expression suggested something far darker than a moment of infidelity. Dad's old saying echoed in my head. Men who are just cheating break hearts. Men who are lying about money break lives. I looked again at Noah's frozen face on the screen, the sharp angle of his jaw, the controlled tension around his eyes. This was not a reckless affair. Something bigger was happening behind Avery's back. Clara asked what I planned to do. Her voice carried the exhaustion of holding this alone. She said she could not tell Avery herself. She needed me to see it first, because she knew I would not dismiss it as jealousy or drama. I took a breath, steadying the rush of panic that wanted me to run to my sister immediately. If I went to Avery now, with nothing more than suspicion and a handful of images, I could destroy her emotionally without giving her anything useful to protect herself. I told Clara we needed to wait. I needed to go back through every form Noah had given Avery, every contract, every document she had mentioned casually over the last few months. Somewhere in that paperwork would be the piece that tied all of this together. I gathered the printed photos into a folder, thanked Clara, and stepped out into the wet night air. The sound of traffic in the distance felt suddenly sharper, the shadows along the building a little darker. I had walked into Clara's office thinking I might uncover a man having an affair. I walked out knowing that whatever Noah was hiding was bigger, deeper, and far more dangerous than I had imagined. And I knew I was going to find it. I drove home from Clara's studio in a fog, bare remembering the turns or the stoplights or the way the city looked under the December rain. My mind kept replaying the images, each one feeling like a string being pulled tighter inside my chest. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I sat there for a minute in the dark, listening to the steady hum of the engine before shutting it off. The silence pressed in around me. Inside, I dropped my bag on the couch and turned on a single lamp in the corner. The warm circle of light felt strangely out of place after everything I had just seen. I took off my coat, draped it over the back of a chair, and sat at my small dining table, the same place I had helped Avery fill out wedding forms and vendor agreements just a few months earlier. There were certain papers I had avoided thinking about since the wedding. Not because I had concerns at the time, but because it had all seemed so normal, so harmless. Now those same papers were the first things I needed to look at. I opened my laptop and searched through my email until I found the folder, labeled Avery Wedding. There, buried among copies of contracts and timelines and receipts, was the document Avery had first brought to me in late spring. She had walked into my apartment one evening, holding a stack of papers, her hair pulled back in a loose bun from a long hospital shift. She had asked if I could quickly look over something Noah wanted her to sign. I remember teasing her about how married life had not even started yet and she was already bringing legal work to her sister. She had laughed and said it was only an investment form, something about combining future assets. The document was titled Investment Authorization. At the time, I had skimmed through it, focusing mostly on the language at the beginning. It was written in a way that seemed legitimate enough, referencing financial planning, long-term growth strategies, and portfolio management. Nothing jumped out as explicitly dangerous. I remembered telling Avery that if she trusted Noah, she could sign it, but she should make sure she understood what accounts were included. She had nodded and said she did. She had looked tired and happy, and so sure of her choice. Now, sitting alone in my apartment, I opened the file again and read every line slowly. The further I got, the more the uneasy feeling in my stomach grew. The agreement granted Noah administrative access to any accounts included, under what the document called shared marital investments. That wording could mean many things, depending on how it was interpreted. It allowed him to transfer funds, manage investments, and authorize transactions under certain circumstances, all without needing Avery's immediate approval. I closed my eyes for a second, remembering Avery's voice when she had said it was just a simple authorization. She had trusted her fiancé. She had trusted me. I had not read deeply enough. I had not seen the way he framed the language to sound harmless. I felt a small wave of guilt rise in my chest, the familiar sting of realizing I had missed something I should have caught. I went back to the top of the document and looked at the company name listed as the managing institution. Northwest Horizon Financial Group. That was what Noah had mentioned several times when talking about how he worked in financial planning. It sounded legitimate enough, but something about the polished name and the vague descriptions made me feel uneasy in a way I could not quite explain. I opened a new tab and typed the company name into the search bar. The first result took me to what appeared to be a professional-looking website, with stock images of smiling couples holding coffee mugs and charts pointing upward. But when I scrolled to the bottom and clicked on the business registration link, the name attached to the registration was not Noah's. It was someone named Liam Archer. I stared at the name for a long moment. Liam Archer. It meant nothing to me at first, but when I clicked deeper into the records, a detail made my breath catch. The archived page listed a date of birth and a previous address in Colorado. I clicked again, following a trail of old links, until I found an image on a local business registry site. It was small and grainy, but it was unmistakably the same man who had stood next to my sister at the altar 3 months ago. The same face, the same build, the same eyes. No was Liam, or Liam was Noah. Either way, the man Avery married was not who he claimed to be. A cold wave moved through my chest as I clicked through more pages. There were mentions of the same name popping up in Utah a few years later. A short engagement, noted in a local announcement that had been quietly withdrawn 2 weeks before the wedding date. No explanation, no follow-up, just a blank space where a celebration should have been. And years before that, a canceled marriage license filing in Colorado with a different woman's name beside his. My pulse thudded unpleasantly in my ears. It felt like stepping into a dark room and not knowing where the floor ended. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment, trying to steady myself. Dad's voice drifted back from a memory I had not thought about in years. I was 18, getting ready to leave for college, and I had brought home a boy I was dating at the time. David had pulled me aside and said something that irritated me in the moment. He had said that men who look perfect on paper often spend the most time making sure you never look behind the paper. He had told me to pay attention to what people tried to hide rather than what they showed. I had rolled my eyes back then, telling him not everything was a suspicious case file waiting to be opened. Now his words settled over me like a weight. I pulled the laptop closer again and kept digging. I was good at this. Research, connecting dots, noticing what did not match. And tonight, everything about Noah did not match. Not his name, not his work history, not his company. The more I uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. He changed locations every few years. He appeared in engagement announcements that ended abruptly. He registered short-lived businesses with impressive names, but little traceable activity. It was a trail designed to look real at a glance, but fall apart when examined closely. My chest tightened as I thought of Avery, sitting at her kitchen table, probably believing she had married someone who cared about building a life with her. Someone who wanted to plan their future, not strip it apart. I reached for my phone, tempted to call her right then, to tell her everything. But my hand froze. The photos, the videos, the financial documents, the false identity. It was too much to throw at her in the middle of the night without knowing how. Deep, it all went. I needed more than half-formed discoveries and speculative fear. I needed proof. I needed to know what exactly Noah was taking from her, what he had already taken, and what he planned to take next. I went back to the website for Northwest Horizon Financial Group and started clicking through the pages again, this time with a sharper eye. I checked the contact address, which appeared to be an office building in downtown Portland. Then I opened another tab and searched the building's lease directory. The company was not listed, not under the full name, not under any variation. A slow certainty started forming in my chest, the kind that made my skin prickle. Whatever Noah was doing, it was not simply about Hallie, or about sneaking off into hallways of wedding venues. It was structured, purposeful, planned long before Avery ever put on her dress. I saved copies of everything I had found into a private folder on my computer, labeling each file with dates and small notes. I had built enough case summaries in my job to know that organization mattered. I would need all of this if I was going to understand the full picture. Outside, the rain had shifted from a steady drizzle to a soft tapping against my window. The sound was gentle, almost calming, but inside my head, everything felt sharp and loud. I rubbed my temples and took a slow breath. I did not want to believe that Avery had married a man who was lying to her, every level. But every piece I uncovered pointed exactly there. Somewhere between searching records and making notes, fatigue crept up on me. I stood and walked to the kitchen for a glass of water, hoped the coolness would ease the tightness building in my chest. When I came back to the table, the laptop screen glowed softly in the dim room, illuminating the name Liam Archer again. I sat down slowly, the chair creaking under me. My mind drifted back to the night of the wedding, the glow of the string light, the way Avery had looked at Noah as if he were the safest place she had ever stood near. That memory felt fractured now, like something delicate someone had stepped on and cracked without realizing. I rested my fingertips on the keyboard. No, there was still more I had to uncover. The photos and footage were only the beginning. If Noah, or Liam, or whoever he truly was, had built his life on false identities and misleading paperwork, there had to be a pattern. And patterns, once recognized, can never be unseen. I opened a new search tab, ready to find out just how far his deception reached, when a sudden thought stopped me cold. It was not just Avery who knew nothing about his past. It was all of us. Every single one of us had been fooled. The realization settled into the quiet of the room, and I felt myself take a slow, steady breath before beginning the next search. The realization settled into the quiet of the room, and I felt myself take a slow, steady breath before beginning the next search. I did not sleep much that night. When I did drift off for a few minutes at a time, my mind kept dragging me back into half-formed dreams of Avery in her wedding dress, while everything around her blurred and shifted into court documents and security footage. By morning, my eyes felt gritty, and my head ached in that deep way that comes from too little rest and too much thinking. But clarity had come with the daylight. I knew I could not do this alone. I needed to go back to the place where it had all started to go wrong, at least from what I could see now. I needed more information from people who had been there in a different capacity, who had watched the day not as family, but as professionals. On my way into work, I called Clara and asked if she could meet with me again, this time with Shannon present. I kept my voice as even as I could, telling her that I had found some irregularities with Noah's financial background, and that the images and footage she had shown me now looked like part of a bigger problem. There was a brief silence on the line. Then Clara said she could arrange a meeting at Willow Creek that afternoon. Shannon, she had already been uneasy about what they had seen, and wanted to help however she could. I cleared my schedule with a vague mention of a family matter to my DOS, supervising attorney, and drove out toward Bend, the highway stretching ahead under a pale winter sky. The closer I got to Willow Creek Estate, the more my stomach tightened. On the day of the wedding, the drive had felt like a road toward celebration, toward something good finally arriving for our family. Now it felt like traveling back to a crime scene, even if no one had officially called it that yet. When I pulled into the parking lot, the estate looked almost exactly as it had on Avery's wedding day, only quieter. The trees were bare now, their branches tracing dark lines against the sky. The grand front entrance was still immaculate, the stone steps swept clean. Inside, staff were setting tables for a small corporate luncheon in one of the side rooms. The echo of cutlery and muted voices drifted through the hallway as I made my way to the office where Clara had told me to meet them. She and Shannon were already there when I arrived, seated at a small conference table with a laptop open between them. Clara looked tired, dark circles under her eyes. Shannon had her clipboard resting on the table, though for once she was not writing anything on it. They both greeted me with that particular mixture of politeness and concern people use when they know something is wrong but are not sure how bad it will be yet. I sat down across from them and told them what I had found about Northwest, Horizon Financial Group, and the name Liam Archer. I kept my voice level, but I did not soften the facts. A false name, suspicious business registrations, broken engagements in other states. The more I laid out, the more I saw Shannon's jaw tighten. Clara looked down at her hands for a moment, then back up at me with a kind of quiet resolve. Shannon said that after Clara had first called her about the strange staff member in the photo, she had gone back through the schedule for Avery's wedding. Every person who worked that day, from servers to bartenders to security, was listed in their system. The man in the footage with the envelope did not appear anywhere. She had even checked with their staffing agency. No one recognized him. She mentioned something else. Staff members who did work that night had told her later that they were surprised to see an extra supervisor roaming the halls. They had assumed senior management had sent someone to check on the event, because it was a large booking. No one questioned it at the time. Weddings, Shannon said, are full of strangers. People assume anyone in a suit belongs there. We talked through the timeline of the night, piecing together the footage Clara had, the photos, and Shannon's observations. There was a clear pattern. Noah stepping out of the ballroom at specific times, meetings in quiet hallways, the envelope in his hand, the unknown man, and always Hallie orbiting closer than she should have, never far from his path. Hearing her name pulled my thoughts in a different direction. Hallie had been part of our lives since nursing school, showing up at family dinners with Avery, joining us for holidays when she did not have anywhere else to go. She had always been friendly with me, generous with compliments, joking that she wished she had a sister like I did. But looking back with fresh eyes, I could see the little remarks she had made over the years. Comments about Avery being the pretty one, or the lucky one, or the one. She said them like jokes, but sometimes there was a sharp edge under the laughter. At the wedding, Hallie had been almost too bright. Her dress a little lower cut than Avery might have chosen, her laugh a little louder than usual. I had noticed her drifting toward Noah more than once, but had brushed it off as the natural mingling of guests. Now those memories felt different. While we were talking, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen out of habit and saw a name that surprised me. Sophie. She was a barista at the coffee shop a few blocks from Avery's house, a young woman with a streak of purple in her hair who always remembered my order when I visited Avery. We followed each other on social media, exchanging the occasional message about books or local events. We were not close, but we were friendly. I excused myself and opened the message. Sophie had sent a short note saying she hoped it was not weird to reach out, but she thought there was something I needed to see related to Avery's husband. Attached to the message was a single photo. My pulse jumped a little as I tapped it open. The image was slightly grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a phone, but there, on a sidewalk near the coffee shop I recognized by the mural on the wall, stood Noah and Hallie. No wedding attire this time, just street clothes. Hallie was leaning in toward him, laughing at something, her hand resting on his forearm in a way that did not look casual at all. Noah's face was turned toward her, and he had that same expression I'd seen in the hallway photo at the venue. Comfortable. The timestamp on the photo, once I looked closely, made my breath catch. It had been taken roughly 3 weeks before the wedding. I read Sophie's message again. She said she had snapped the picture because she had recognized Hallie from coming into the shop with Avery before, and she had thought at first that Avery was the one with Noah that day. When she realized it was just Hallie and that there was something a little off about the body language, she kept the photo without really knowing why. She wrote that she had hesitated to send it, not wanting to stir up drama, but something about it had been nagging at her ever since Avery's wedding. My hands felt slightly cold as I set the phone down on the table. Clara and Shannon were watching my face for clues. I told them what Sophie had written and then showed them the photo. Shannon exhaled slowly and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as if she needed to physically hold herself together. Clara shook her head softly, more in sadness than surprise. I thought of all the times Hallie had sat at Avery's kitchen table, listening to her talk about Noah, nodding sympathetically, asking questions. She had attended dress fittings, helped assemble centerpieces, and laughed with us over flower choices. All the while, she had been meeting Noah in secret, carving out her own space in a story that was never hers. Jealousy is a strange thing. It can sit quietly in someone for years, disguising itself as admiration or self-deprecating humor. I realized now that Hallie's constant jokes about Avery getting the good men, the good breaks, the good life, were not just jokes. They were little windows into a resentment she had never dealt with. When Noah appeared, successful and charming, and apparently interested, he must have looked like an answer to whatever story she had been telling herself. That if she could take him from Avery, even before he truly belonged to my sister, it would prove something, that she was more desirable, more worthy. But Noah was not a passive object in this. He was not some lost puppy being led astray. The photos and footage and documents all told the same story. Noah was a man who knew how to play roles, how to position himself where he wanted to be, how to make people feel chosen. Hallie's jealousy might have lit the match, but Noah had brought the gasoline. It taught that table with Clara and Shannon. I felt anger rise in me, hot and clean. Not just anger at Noah and Hallie, but anger at the way they had used my sister's trust, our family's gathering, and even this beautiful venue as a backdrop for whatever games they were playing. I caught myself clenching my jaw and forced my shoulders to relax. This was not the time to get lost in rage. I needed to stay clear-headed. There would be a time for confronting people. For now, what mattered was piecing together the full picture. If Noah had been involved with Hallie before the wedding and meeting unknown men behind the venue and operating under a false identity tied to suspicious financial activity, then whatever he wanted from Avery was not love. I saved Sophie's photo to the same secure folder I had started on my laptop and made a mental note to call her later, to thank her and ask more questions. Witnesses, even informal ones, mattered. They saw things the main players did not always notice. When the meeting at Willow Creek ended, Clara walked me back to the entrance. As we stepped outside, the cold air hit my face, and I glanced back at the ballroom through the large windows. I could almost see an overlay of that night 3 months ago layered over the empty room. Fairy lights, music, Avery's dress swaying as she moved, Mom and Dad dancing awkwardly near the edge of the floor. It looked like a happy ending. Now I knew it had only been a beginning, just not the one any of us had thought. I got into my car, set my hands on the steering wheel, and let myself sit in the quiet for a long moment. The evidence was piling up. Noah was not who he said he was. Hallie was not the friend my sister believed her to be. Somewhere in all of this was a plan, and Avery had been placed at the center of it. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine humming to life. It was time to stop just collecting pieces and start thinking about what to do with them. That thought stayed with me the entire drive home, sitting in the passenger seat of my mind like someone whispering that things were far worse than I had admitted to myself. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the sky had begun to dim, the fading light pressing low against the rooftops. Inside, I went straight to my laptop. I had saved everything from the past day into a single folder, but now I opened a fresh document and began typing the name Liam Archer into every search engine, every public records database, every financial background site I had access to through work. Years of paralegal training had taught me that patterns never appear all at once. They build quietly, one little detail after another, like stepping stones across a river. And sure enough, Liam Archer appeared again. This time in a marriage license request filed in Colorado back in 2014. The bride's name was listed as Melissa Hart, age 26. The wedding had been planned at a vineyard outside Fort Collins, but the official record showed a cancellation notice filed 6 days before the ceremony. No explanation, no follow-up, just a single line that said, "License voided by request of applicant." And behind that line, the name of the applicant was Liam, not Melissa. I kept searching. My heart began to thud harder when I found the second record. This one was from Utah in 2019. An engagement announcement had been published online for a woman named Kara Donovan. She ran a small bakery in Provo, according to the article. The announcement included a photo of the groom. Even though the image quality was low and a few years old, it was clearly him. The same posture, the same eyes, the same easy smile that had charmed my sister. That wedding had been called off 8 days before the event. Again, the details were brief. The Donovan family released a short statement asking for privacy. There were no further comments. But when I dug through archived posts, I found one thread from a distant cousin of the bride saying, with only a hint of bitterness, that the family had lost tens of thousands of dollars in deposits, 2 canceled weddings, 2 families who lost large sums of money, 2 women disappeared from public mention afterward, and 1 man walked away each time without explanation. A cold heaviness pulled at the back of my throat as I scrolled deeper. I was no longer looking at misunderstandings or relationship issues. I was looking at a pattern of manipulation, of financial damage, of intentional vanishings, timed right before permanent commitments. I copied each record, screenshotting pages, saving archived versions, labeling everything with dates. My fingers felt slightly numb, the way they do when you realize you are not chasing shadows anymore. You are holding something real. At one point, I pushed back from the desk, pressing both palms to my forehead. I remembered Dad's voice again, the same warning he had given me when I was younger. He had said that trust is earned by consistency, not charm, and that men who run from their own history will eventually run from you as well. He had spoken from experience. He had lost his own sister to a man who had drained her finances before, disappearing into another state. I had grown up hearing that story as a cautionary tale. I had never imagined something similar would enter Avery's life. My phone buzzed softly beside me. For a moment, I thought it might be Avery, and a sharp wave of guilt passed through me. I still had not told her anything. I was not ready. Not yet. I picked up the phone and saw a different name, Detective Dana Blake. I had emailed her earlier, attaching only the legal documents and identity records. Nothing personal, nothing emotional. I had simply stated that I believed my sister's husband may be connected to 2 prior suspicious marriage terminations, and that he might be operating under a false identity. I had expected a delayed response, maybe a polite acknowledgement in a day or 2. Instead, she wrote that she could meet with me right away. I grabbed my coat and keys, bare aware of the cold night air as I drove to the precinct. When I walked into the small conference room Dana had indicated, she was already there, a stack of printed documents spread out in front of her. She was younger than I expected for a detective with her reputation, probably in her early 40s, with steady eyes that made you feel both seen and assessed in the same instant. She motioned for me to sit. She said she had reviewed the records I sent and had already cross-referenced them with cases she had tracked for years. She explained that there had been a pattern of marriage-related financial scams across several Western states, and though the suspect had never been officially named, the physical descriptions and timelines matched the man known as Noah Ward in my family, or Liam Archer in Colorado, or whatever his name had been before that. Seeing her talk about him like that, in the detached tone of someone describing a predator, made my heart pound. She said the issue had always been evidence. The man left little trace behind. He avoided digital footprints. He used temporary addresses. He signed contracts that were cleverly structured to avoid accountability. He vanished before anyone had enough proof to pursue charges. She looked at me carefully before asking if I understood what this meant for Avery. I nodded, but inside my chest, something twisted painfully. Dana said that based on what I had shown her and the history she already knew, Noah had likely targeted Avery for a reason. He would have assessed her financial stability, her emotional openness, her desire to build a future. He would have used all of it to position himself as the person she wanted. Then she asked one question. Did my sister have significant savings? I remember swallowing hard before answering. Avery had told me once, in an excited whisper over coffee, that she had saved $120,000 from years of nursing and overtime shifts. She had reached that amount just before the wedding. She had said she wanted to start married life feeling secure. Saying those words out loud to the detective made my stomach flip. Dana wrote something down, paused, then told me calmly that if Noah had married Avery, then yes, he was almost certainly after her assets, or our family's assets. I felt the room tilt slightly, not dramatically, just enough that I had to steady my breath to stay focused. I stared at the table for a long moment, tracing the wood grain with my eyes. My sister, who had spent her whole life giving to others, who exhausted herself working double shifts, who cried from relief when she finally found someone she thought she could build something real with. And that man might have chosen her only because she was financially stable and emotionally trusting. I asked Dana what we should do. Her expression softened just a fraction, enough for me to see she understood what this meant. She said that we needed to move carefully, that uncovering someone like Noah required strategy, not panic. But she did not sugarcoat the risk. She said that if he felt cornered, he might accelerate whatever plan he had. She said that silence was my best protection for now, that Avery should not be warned until we had a clearer plan. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that responsibility settle over me. I left the station in a haze of cold air and dim streetlights, the world outside moving with ordinary calm, while everything inside me felt like a cracked window holding back a storm. In the quiet drive home, I thought of Avery's smile. I thought of her future. I thought of Dad's worried look whenever he tried to hide concern from us, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever Noah had planned, whatever he was trying to take, I would not let him get any closer. Not to Avery, not to our family. I parked in front of my apartment and sat for a moment, hands still on the steering wheel, feeling the engine tick as it cooled. The night was silent around me, but inside my mind everything was moving, aligning, forming a shape I had not yet seen clearly. There was more to uncover. More than identities and old records, more than canceled weddings. I could feel it gathering like pressure behind a closed door. And when I went inside and opened my laptop again, I knew exactly where I needed to look next. I stared at my phone as another memory rose in my mind, one I had filed away as harmless until now. A few weeks after the wedding, Avery had told me she introduced Noah to our neighbor, Eleanor Briggs. It had been such a casual detail at the time. Something about asking Eleanor whether a certain allergy medication made her drowsy. Avery had laughed that Noah somehow turned the conversation toward retirement, planning, and pensions. She sounded proud that her new husband wanted to help an elderly neighbor. Back then, I barely reacted. Now that memory felt like a flare fired in the dark. Eleanor had lived on that street for decades, the kind of neighbor who baked cinnamon bread for new families and saved graduation cards in a memory box. She was a retired school librarian, careful with her savings, proud of having built her nest egg on her own. She was exactly the kind of target men like Noah looked for. The next morning, I drove straight to her house under the pretense of returning a book. She welcomed me in with warm eyes, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat with me at the small kitchen table, dressed in its floral cloth. While she talked about neighborhood gossip, my eyes kept sliding to the envelopes on the table. A few bore logos from financial institutions. I eased us toward the subject, mentioning Avery had said Noah had been helping her with retirement questions. Eleanor's polite expression flickered. She said he had been very kind, had stopped by with brochures, offering free advice because he hated seeing older people misled by big firms. He talked gently at first, then drifted into more complex terms she did not fully understand. He had suggested a future meeting to walk her through investment options. I felt a pulse of dread. I asked if she had given him any account information. She shook her head. Not yet. But he had called twice since then, the second call more insistent. Talk about limited windows and market shifts. She said she felt uneasy, but did not want to be rude. I told her she was not being rude. She was being wise. I told her his credentials did not check out. I did not explain everything, but I told her enough. She studied me quietly, then nodded, relief softening her shoulders. She handed me the brochure Noah had left and said she doubted she would be. Calling him back. Outside, the winter sun looked too bright for the weight in my chest. It struck me that one wrong conversation could have pushed Eleanor off a cliff she did not see coming. Anger surged hot through me. It was one thing for Noah to lie to Avery, but going after a 70-something widow who trusted her neighbors felt unforgivable. On my way home, I realized there was one person left I needed to confront, Hallie. I texted her, asking if we could meet. She declined, said she was busy. I replied it was about Avery, and that it was important. Minutes later, she suggested a small cafe far from Avery's neighborhood, which told me everything I needed to know. When I walked in, she was already there, composed but tense, her perfect hair and effortless makeup looking more like armor than style. We exchanged polite small talk, her voice tightening slightly when she asked how Avery was adjusting to married life. I placed Sophie's photo on the table and slid it toward her. Before she could mask her reaction, I saw panic, recognition, guilt. She tried to, but I laid down a second photo. The raw image Clara showed me. Noah's hand on her back in a hallway during the reception. We sat in silence until her shoulders sagged. Her fingers twisted the napkin until it tore. She said she had always been jealous of Avery, that Avery walked through life with a kind of quiet gravity that drew people in. Hallie, on the other hand, was the sidekick, the funny friend, the one men dated but did not commit to. When she met Noah, he noticed her first. He had been a regular at the coffee shop where she once worked. He remembered her jokes, her schedule, her favorite pastries. She let herself believe he saw her in a way no one else had. Then he saw Avery at a charity event, and everything shifted. Suddenly, all his attention went to Avery. Saying it aloud broke something in her. Her eyes filled. Her voice cracked. She admitted she had been the one to restart things before the wedding. She reached out. She flirted. She arranged secret meetups. Noah encouraged her. He told her he was unsure about the wedding, that things would make sense after the big day, that he just needed to follow through to avoid drama. She believed him, desperately. During the reception, he pulled her into that hallway. She said at that moment she thought she had won. I asked if she knew anything about his other identity, the canceled weddings, the missing deposits. She shook her head quickly, terrified. She said she knew he kept his work vague, but thought all finance men did. She never searched for him online. She preferred fantasy. I told her what I knew. The name Liam Archer, the failed engagements in other states, the tens of thousands of dollars that disappeared each time. Watching her face drain of color, watching her breath catch as she realized she had been used by him as easily as Avery had, almost made me pity her. Almost. We sat in that small booth, surrounded by the hiss of an espresso machine and whispered conversations from strangers. Hallie's jealousy crumbled into fear. She said she did not know who he really was. She said she felt sick thinking about the times she had defended him. I asked what she planned to do now. She said she did not know. She asked what I wanted from her. I told her the truth. I needed everything she had ever heard him say, any account he mentioned, any clients he referenced, any messages he sent her. If she wanted to salvage even a thread of dignity, she had to stop protecting him. She stared at the photos for a long time. Finally, she nodded. She said she would cooperate. That guilt alone was not why she agreed. She said in a small voice that a part of her had always cared for Avery, even when her jealousy twisted things. When I walked back to my car under the cold night air, I felt something shift inside me. I had confirmation of Noah's betrayal from someone who had stood close to him. I had seen how deep his manipulation went, and for the first time, I sensed he was beginning to lose control of the pieces he thought he had, arranged so perfectly. Hallie had opened a door. Now it was time to walk through it and end this for good. Hallie, ready to talk, changed the air around me. Walking back to my car that night, I could feel this quiet click inside, like a lock turning. Up until then, I had been chasing shadows, connecting documents and screenshots and uneasy memories. Now I had someone from inside his orbit willing to lay out what she knew. It was not enough to bring him down on its own, but it was enough to move from collecting to acting. I went home, backed up every file, saved every message Hallie forwarded, and typed out a summary while the details were still sharp in my mind. Then I sent Detective Dana Blake a brief email asking for an urgent meeting and letting her know I had a cooperating witness. And more evidence about Noah, or Liam, or whatever name he had used last. She replied faster than I expected. The next morning, I was sitting in the same small conference room at the precinct, a paper cup of coffee cooling in my hands. Dana had a legal pad in front of her, but she seemed to prefer to listen first, her attention steady as I walked her through everything. The photos, the hallway footage, the fake manager, Eleanor and her near miss, Hallie and her confession about the affair, and his promises. When I finished, she let out a slow breath and then leaned back in her chair. She said that what we had now was a strong narrative of a pattern, backed by circumstantial evidence, matching a suspect she and colleagues in other states had been tracking for nearly a decade. The missing piece was still the same. Direct proof of intent to defraud, captured in a way that would stand up in court. She looked at me with that assessing detective stare and asked if I was willing to help with something more proactive. Not reckless, she said, but strategic. She reminded me that there was risk in any move against someone like Noah, but that doing nothing had its own danger. It would give him more time to drain Avery and move on. I told her I was willing. The words came out before I had time to second-guess them. Protecting my sister had already become the axis my days were spinning around. I could not imagine stepping back now. Dana outlined the idea carefully. Noah's pattern depended on paperwork. He needed documents signed, permissions granted, authorizations buried in legal-sounding language. If we could draw him into a situation where he believed he had a chance to get exactly what he wanted, he might relax enough to talk more freely about how it worked. If he explained his methods while trying to convince Avery to move her money, that explanation could be recorded. His own voice could fill in the gaps between the scattered records from Colorado and Utah. To do that, we needed a believable bait. A new investment agreement offering him a chance to consolidate Avery's assets into something he could control. It had to look real enough to tempt him, but be drafted under the eye of someone who would make sure it did not. Actually hand him power he could use. That was where my work came in. Later that day, I walked into my firm's office with a knot in my stomach. Rose & Keller was not a large practice, but it was respectable. And my boss, attorney Evan Rhodes, had a reputation for being meticulous and cautious. I knew I could not tell him every gritty detail, but I also could not involve him under false pretenses. So after he finished a call, I stepped into his office and closed the door gently behind me. I told him that a family member of mine, my sister, had married a man who I now believed was involved in a pattern of financial movement, abuse, and fraudulent engagements. I said that a detective had confirmed he was a suspect in a multi-state investigation, and that they needed help drafting a document for a controlled meeting that would be monitored by law enforcement. I emphasized that no real transfer of funds would occur, that the goal was to protect my sister and gather lawful evidence. Evan listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled in front of him. When I finished, he asked a few precise questions, testing both the legal and ethical footing of what we were discussing. Could Avery give informed consent to participate in a recorded meeting? Yes. Would the document clearly state that no authority was truly granted without further verification, even if that clause was on a later page? Yes. Would law enforcement be present and supervising, ensuring everything stayed within proper boundaries? Yes. After a long pause, he nodded. He said he did not like that his paralegal's family had been dragged into something like this, but he understood the necessity. He said he would oversee the drafting personally, and that our firm would cooperate with Detective Blake as long as procedures were followed correctly. Hearing those words made a little of the tension leave my shoulders. For once, my professional skills and my personal desperation were pointing in the same direction. Over the next 2 days, I worked with Evan in the conference room, crafting an investment agreement that read like every other glossy, lightly dense document I had ever processed, but with safeguards built into its skeleton. It outlined a joint investment venture between Avery and Noah under the umbrella of Northwest Horizon Financial Group, using the language he favored, the phrases he had used in emails. It spoke of consolidating assets, creating new portfolios, authorizing an administrator to move funds in response to market conditions. On the surface, it looked like what Noah would want. Underneath, it was a trap. The key authorizations were placeholders, marked internally, so they would never become active. The signature block was incomplete in a way that would leave it unenforceable. Buried on a later page, in dense but clear wording, was a clause that required a follow-up verification call from our office before any action could be taken. That call would never happen. All of this meant Avery could sign in front of him, and he would think he was steps away from access, while in reality, he was only steps away from exposing himself. When the draft was complete, we scanned and forwarded a copy to Detective Blake, who went through it with a financial crime specialist. They approved it with a few small suggestions. Then the practical planning started. The meeting would take place at our firm in a mid-sized conference room with neutral decor. Ava, our receptionist, would schedule it under the guise of Avery seeking a neutral attorney to review a large investment before committing. That way, Noah would feel flattered that she respected his judgment, but wanted to be careful. It would appeal to his ego and his need to appear legitimate. Avery, after a long, painful conversation with me and then with Dana, agreed to participate. She had broken down when I first told her the truth about Noah's past, about his other lives, his other wives, the money. I had never seen my sister look so shattered. But underneath the hurt, a hard ember of anger had lit. She wanted to protect herself. She wanted to protect other women who might be standing where she stood. So she agreed to sit across from him one more time and let him talk. Detective Blake and Deputy Rudd would be in the adjacent room behind a one-way mirror panel hidden in what looked like smoked glass. Recording equipment would be set up, tested twice, then left running. Evan would be present as the official attorney, but he would mostly play the role of cautious observer, asking gentle questions that nudged Noah into explaining his scheme. My role would be to sit beside Avery as her paralegal, organizing the paperwork, handing pages back and forth, and asking the kind of small, clarifying questions that sound innocent but open the door for more detail. I had helped enough clients walk through contracts to know exactly which questions made people talk. The night before the meeting, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open again, going through Avery's email account with her permission. We wanted to make sure we understood every angle Noah might use. I typed his name into the search bar, then tried the other name we knew, Liam, just in case. Message threads popped up. Some were simple, everyday interactions. Notes about dinner plans or schedule changes. Others were longer, recent ones with attached documents and links, labeled with words like opportunity and projected growth. One particular email caught my eye. It was from early in their engagement, before the wedding plans had really taken shape. Noah had sent Avery a long message about a special investment vehicle, he said. He was testing for a few select clients. The message included a PDF attachment and an external link. At the time, Avery had not clicked the link, telling him in her reply that she was too swamped at work to think about investments. He had responded playfully, saying they would revisit it once the chaos settled. I forwarded the email thread to myself, then opened the original message and looked at the full header information. Most people never see that part, the strings of numbers and addresses that show where a message really came from. In my job, learning to read those strings had become second nature. I scanned the data, line by line, until one particular IP address jumped out at me. I sent a screenshot of that header to Detective Blake with a short note, asking if it meant anything to her. I did not expect an immediate answer. It was late, and we all had a long day ahead. But within half an hour, my phone buzzed with her reply. She wrote that the IP address in Noah's email to Avery matched one used in communications from a bogus financial domain during the Utah case in 2019. Same numerical sequence, same hosting pattern, same shadow network she and another investigator had flagged back then. but could not tie directly to a person. They had suspected it belonged to the man who vanished before marrying Kara, Donovan. Now, with this header, they could link that digital footprint straight to the email account of the man sitting in my sister's living room. I stared at the message, a strange mix of dread and vindication washing over me. This was it. The scattered pieces from Colorado and Utah, the canceled weddings, the missing deposits, the ghost company registrations. All of it converged here, in one man with two names, sitting in Portland with a ring on my sister's finger and his eyes on her savings. I closed the laptop slowly, letting the quiet of the apartment settle around me. Tomorrow's meeting was no longer just about Avery's future. It was about every woman he had already hurt and every woman he would target next if we failed. For the first time in days, my fear and my anger felt aligned with a clear purpose. There was still so much that could go wrong. He could sense the trap. He could refuse to talk. He could bolt. But looking at the careful plan on my notepad and feeling the solid weight of the documents we had crafted, I knew we were as ready as we could be. All that was left was to walk into that conference room, sit down across from him, and listen. That was the thought I carried with me the next morning as I stood in front of the glass doors of Rhodes and Keller, my breath clouding the air. Avery stood beside me, pale but steady, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. When she looked at me, her eyes were searching, as if trying to find reassurance in my face. I reached over and squeezed her arm once before pushing the door open. The firm was quieter than usual. It was mid-morning on a weekday, but Evan had arranged the schedule so only essential staff would be present. Adam greeted us with her usual warm smile, though her eyes flicked toward Avery with a hint of concern. She led us to conference room 2, a room with soft lighting, a long table, and frosted windows that looked out toward an interior hallway. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish. Everything looked so ordinary, which only made the tension inside me feel sharper. Evan was already seated at the far end of the table with a notepad and a fountain pen laid neatly in front of him. He rose when we entered, shook Avery's hand gently, and nodded at me with that calm, steady presence I had come to rely on. He asked Avery if she was ready. She took a breath and said she was. Her voice did not shake, and that made something tighten at the back of my throat. We took our seats. I sat next to Avery, files arranged neatly in front of me, including the drafted investment agreement and the supplemental forms that would serve as bait. Behind the frosted panel at the far wall, I knew Detective Dana Blake and Deputy Rudd were in position. The recording equipment had been tested 3 times. Evan had reviewed every clause again that morning. All we needed now was Noah. He arrived 3 minutes later. The door opened, and he walked in with that same easy smile I had seen on the wedding day, the smile that had fooled all of us. He wore a tailored navy suit and a tie that looked deliberately understated, the kind of man who wanted to appear successful without appearing showy. His eyes lit up when he saw Avery, and he kissed her cheek, calling her sweetheart. She stiffened but managed to return the greeting. When he looked at me, his smile widened. He teased that he hoped I was not here to make the meeting too complicated. He said it as a joke, but his tone held a subtle warning. I smiled back evenly and said I was just here to help make everything clear. He took his seat across from us, placing his leather folder on the table. Ev began by explaining that Avery had requested a neutral attorney to review the proposed investment plan. He said it was standard practice, especially when couples were combining their finances. Noah nodded confidently, thanking him for making time. His voice was smooth and relaxed. He believed he held the advantage in the room. That was exactly what we needed. Evan gestured for him to describe the investment structure he had proposed to Avery. Noah straightened slightly in his chair, warming to the opportunity. He explained that their funds would be combined into a managed portfolio under what he called a single administrator arrangement. He talked about optimizing tax exposure, moving assets quickly in response to market fluctuations, and allowing him to act with flexibility to protect their shared financial future. As he spoke, I asked small, simple questions. How would the administrator be selected? What safeguards existed to prevent misuse? How would profits be distributed? Every question was phrased softly, politely, as if I were only trying to understand. Each one nudged him to say more, Noah answered with rehearsed confidence, using terms that sounded legitimate on the surface, but, when examined closely, were hollow. He said the administrator would be him, of course, since he had the most experience. He said profits would be routed through an account in his name for tax reasons. He said paperwork delays could be avoided by granting him full access up front. Beside me, Avery kept her expression carefully neutral, but I saw her hands fold into themselves under the table. Noah did not notice. He was too busy enjoying the sound of his own explanations. When he paused to sip water, Ian leaned forward slightly and asked him to clarify one point. He said that if the administrator account was in Noah's sole name, how would Avery verify the movement of her funds? Noah smiled and said transparently through him. He said he would update her regularly, and that it was unnecessary to complicate things with redundant authorization layers. That was one of the statements Dana needed. The system in Utah had worked exactly the same way. Funds pooled, moved through a single name, then evaporated just days before a wedding. Noah reached for the folder in front of me and asked if that was an agreement he had emailed Avery. I told him it was, with a few clarifying revisions added by our firm. I passed him the top document. He scanned the pages quickly, nodding as if impressed with our formatting. Then he asked Avery to sign the signature block on page 6. Avery hesitated just long enough to be believable, then took the pen Evan offered. She looked at Noah once, then signed her name. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Noah gave her an approving smile and said they were almost done. Just one more form. He reached into his folder and slid another document across the table. It was one we had anticipated. A form titled Full Access Authorization. It would give him immediate and unfiltered control over her accounts. It was the document that tied everything together, the one he had used in Colorado and Utah, the one that counted as intent. Ian asked him politely to explain why such full access was required before any investment was executed. Noah launched into another confident explanation about needing flexibility to protect their assets. He made a point of stressing that time-sensitive opportunities could be lost if he had to wait for Avery's signature each time. He said that marriage was about trust and partnership, and this form reflected that trust. I watched him closely. His eyes had a shine now, a slight eagerness. He thought he was inches away from securing everything. He thought he had already won. Avery lifted the pen, but before she touched the paper, Evan asked if she wanted to review page 2 of the document. She set the pen down and turned the page. Noah leaned forward to guide her. That movement was all we needed. The frosted panel at the far wall opened with a sharp click. Detective Blake entered first. Deputy Rudd followed. Both stepped fully into the room. The air shifted, a sudden stillness falling over the table. Noah jerked back in his chair, confusion flashing across his face, then suspicion, then something like fear. Dana spoke with calm authority, her badge visible. She said Noah Archer, also known as Liam Archer, was under arrest for fraud, attempted financial exploitation, identity deception, and a series of marriage-related scams under investigation in multiple states. For a moment, he froze. Then he looked at Avery, then at me, and something in his expression twisted. He tried to stand, but Rudd was already moving. In a few seconds, Noah's hands were pulled behind his back and cuffs clicked shut. Avery did not cry. She did not speak. She simply stared at the man she had married 3 months earlier. The man she now knew had never loved her. Her face shifted through emotions I could not name, then settled into something quiet, something resolved. Noah tried to say something, his voice rising in protest, but Dana cut him off, reading his rights clearly and firmly. He glared at me once as they led him toward the door, but it was a look without power, a look from a man whose plans had finally collapsed around him. When the door closed behind them, the room went silent again. Avery exhaled a long, shaky breath, as if she had been holding it for months. I reached for her hand, and she gripped mine. Evan stood slowly and asked if she wanted water. She nodded, still staring at the empty doorway. We all sat there for a few moments, letting the quiet settle around us. And then Avery whispered, almost to herself, that she never wanted to see his face again. I nodded gently, knowing the hardest part was still ahead of us. But the worst part, the danger, the deception, the silence, was finally over. Avery whispered that she never wanted to see his face again, and something in her voice made the whole room fall still. Evan closed the door softly after the officers left, and for a moment, none of us moved. It felt like every sound in the building had paused. To make space for what? Avery had just survived. She sat there with her shoulders drawn in tight, not crying, not shaking, just breathing as if she had forgotten how and was relearning it slowly. I eased my chair closer and let her lean against me. She stayed like that for a long minute, quiet and folded in on herself. When she finally sat up, she wiped the corner of her eye with the back of her hand and whispered that she felt foolish, that she should have seen something, that she had ignored too many small moments. I shook my head and told her none of this was on her. He had fooled everyone, even people trained to spot deception. She just looked at me with tired eyes and said she did not know who she was married to at all. The officers returned briefly to confirm they had taken Noah downtown for booking and would process the charges through the Financial Crimes Unit. Dana thanked us both for our cooperation, and she gave Avery a card for a trauma counselor the precinct often recommended. Avery held the card like it was something fragile. When the room finally emptied, Ev stayed only long enough to tell me that I had handled myself with more professionalism and strength than he had ever expected from someone my age. He said to take the rest of the day off and to tell him if we needed anything. When we stepped outside, the cold air wrapped around us in a way that felt cleansing. Avery looped her arm through mine as we walked to the car, leaning into me like she used to when we were younger and crossed parking lots late at night. Halfway home, she asked in a soft voice if we could go straight to Mom and Dad's. She did not want to be alone in her house. Not yet. I reached over and squeezed her hand, telling her we would go wherever she needed. When we pulled into the driveway, Dad was already outside on the porch as if he had sensed something in the air. He walked down the steps the moment we got out of the car. Avery fell into his arms without a word, and Dad held her the way he used to when she scraped her knee or broke up with a high school boyfriend, with that protective stillness only a parent can offer. Mom came out behind him, her eyes filling the moment she saw Avery's face. God asked me what happened, and I told him enough to understand without drowning him in detail. When I said Noah had been arrested for fraud and identity deception, Dad's jaw tightened in a way I had not seen since I was a child. Then he looked at me. His daughter, who had dug through documents and emails and digital footprints, who had chased down answers no one wanted to believe. And he said that I had saved our family. He said that if I had not trusted my instincts, if I had not followed the trail, Avery could have lost everything. Hearing him say he was proud of me almost knocked the breath out of my chest. Dad is a man of few compliments. When he gives one, it lands like a stone in still water, heavy and lasting. Inside the house, Mom made tea, even though none of us were thirsty. It was her way of putting the world back in order. Avery sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in one of Mom's soft blankets, staring at her hands. She finally started talking in small fragments, pieces of disbelief and grief that came out sideways. She said she felt humiliated. She said she kept replaying moments in her mind, wondering which ones were real. She said she did not know how to rebuild trust in herself after this. I sat beside her and told her what I had learned the past few days, that people like Noah choose their targets deliberately, not because the victims are naive, but because they are kind, hopeful, generous, trusting. I told her that men like him create versions of themselves designed to charm and disarm, that she had not failed. He had deceived, and that guilt did not belong to her. Mom reached across the table and took Avery's hand in both of hers. She said that healing would take time, and that therapy was not a weakness. Avery nodded slowly, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. She said she wanted to talk to someone who could help her piece together what happened and understand why she had ignored the small signs. She said she wanted to learn how to protect her heart without closing it forever. Later that evening, after Avery had gone upstairs to rest, Dad and I stood alone in the living room. He asked how I had learned to track down all those records, those names, those past engagements. I told him I had just followed the pieces until they made a shape I could not ignore. He looked at me and said that when I was born, he always knew I would be the one who protected the people around me, the one who asked the questions no one else wanted to ask. For the first time in a long time, I let myself feel something like peace. Over the next week, the case moved forward quickly. Hallie met with Detective Blake and handed over every message, every photo, every scrap of conversation she still had from Noah. It was painful to read, painful to see how willingly she had believed him, but it also tied threads together in a way that strengthened the case. She apologized to Avery through a long voicemail she left, a trembling confession filled with regret and shame. Avery did not call her back, but she listened to the message twice before deleting it. Eleanor Briggs, the sweet neighbor Noah had tried to charm, came by one afternoon with a small tin of cookies and a thank you note for me. She said she had prayed for clarity and believed that God had placed me in the right place at the right time. I hugged her carefully and told her she had saved her own future by listening to her instincts. She laughed softly and said that sometimes God speaks through instincts too. Work changed for me as well. Evan called me into his office at the end of the week and told me he had spoken with the partners. They had reviewed my research, my drafting work, my ability to stay composed in a high-stress legal environment. He said they wanted me to take on more responsibility in the fraud and financial misconduct division. He said my attention to detail and persistence were exactly what that branch needed. For a moment, I could not speak. Then I said yes, with something like gratitude and disbelief tangled inside my chest. As for Avery, she began therapy with a woman recommended by Dana. She went twice a week at first, then once a week. She told me it felt like peeling off adhesive bandages, one layer at a time. Painful, but necessary. She decided to return to her own house eventually, but only after changing the locks and walking through each room slowly, claiming the space inch by inch. She started spending her early mornings jogging again, the way she used to, before everything became heavy. She told me one evening, over dinner at Mom and Dad's table, that she planned to take a solo trip in the spring, somewhere quiet, maybe the Oregon coast or a cabin near Mount Hood. She said she needed to learn again what her own company felt like. I told her I thought that sounded perfect. Life did not return to what it had been before Noah entered it. It became something different, something steadier and more intentional. The cracks he left behind were real, but so was the strength that grew in their place. As for me, I learned something I had forgotten for a while. That intuition is not fear, it is guidance. That family, at its best, is a shield we raise for one another when trouble comes. And that justice does not always arrive in a dramatic sweep. Sometimes it comes from persistence, from asking the right questions, from refusing to let silence become the final word. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.